Good morning and welcome to the Macquarie Business School webinar, Make Better Decisions Using a Strategic Mindset with Dr. Roger Moser. I'm Suzanne Holmes. I'm the Head of Marketing, Engagement and Business Development here at Macquarie Business School. This is our 16th webinar in our series, which have focused on key business topics such as strategy, AI, innovation and change, leadership, finance, and personal impact and influence. Nearly 5,000 people have registered for our webinars, and our alumni, corporate clients and students have found this content to be highly valuable in what has been a challenging year for all of us. We thank you for your ongoing support of this webinar series and our corporate and professional education programs. Some of these webinars have actually also been extended into short courses due to popular demand and are now available as virtual learning and are now on our website for registration. The webinar today will be recorded and a copy will be sent to everybody who has registered. I will also be moderating the Q&A, so I look forward to seeing your questions coming through at the conclusion of our presentation. Thank you for joining us, and it looks like we've got enough of an audience to get started. I'd now like to introduce Associate Professor Dr. Tony Carlton, who will start our presentation today with Welcome to Country and introduce our key presenter today, Dr. Roger Moser. Good morning, Tony.
Good morning, Suzanne, and let's open by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which Macquarie University is located, the Wadawurrung clan of the Darug Nation. We pay our respects to their elders, both past and present, and we extend those respects to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who may be with us today. The increasing availability of data, in conjunction with an increasingly complex and uncertain environment, certainly challenges our ability to make good decisions. In today's webinar, Roger Moser is going to introduce us to the field of decision intelligence and explain how it can be used to help us make better decisions. Roger has a PhD, is a senior lecturer at Macquarie Business School specialising in strategic management. He's an active researcher. He holds senior appointments at several European universities and also engages actively with industry as an advisor and investor. You're a busy guy, Roger. Today's webinar will be recorded and a link provided in our follow-up email. We'd also encourage you to use the Q&A function throughout the webinar, and Roger will have the opportunity to address any issues that you raise. With that, I'd now like to hand over to Roger. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. A warm welcome also from my side. Today, I would like to provide you with an overview on the concept of decision intelligence, or as the title says, how to make better decisions using a strategic mindset. Well, when I talk about, strategic mindsets, I primarily refer to two kinds of mental models. First, mental models from all sorts of scientific areas that help you to analyze and understand a specific situation and therefore allow you to better predict what might happen in the future. And second, mental models that actually support you in avoiding any cognitive bias while you turn data, information, and knowledge into actual decisions. So in the following, I will try to explain you how I have structured my own efforts to improve the use of these kind of mental models and subsequently try to make better decisions as an academic, a chairman, or an advisor. So let me first start with a question. Does this business environment look familiar to you? And also, do those trends probably bother you? We have intensified trade wars between large countries. We have new technological developments such as IoT, robotics, 3D printing, blockchain solutions, machine learning, or low power wide area networks, all changing the way business is done and how consumers interact with companies and with each other. We have ecological developments causing a lot of regulatory changes in the midterm and slowly questioning the basics of some business models in the long run. And certainly, we have now COVID-19, which has created a business environment where many rules of the game need to be questioned and probably rewritten. And I have no doubt that most of you, actually agree here. And so I think it's safe to assume that A, most of us have actually never experienced more uncertainty and ambiguity with respect to our corporate environment than today. And B, that most of us have also not been trained to actually deal with such situations, nor that our corporate structures have been designed to ensure optimal decision-making under such circumstances. So let's continue if my slides also follow me. With a second question, and that's how much do you agree with the following statement? Well, what Peter Drucker once said is, we are at the beginning of a period of extreme flux, of extreme change and great competitive pressure, in which traditional ways of doing things, traditional products, traditional processes, will be challenged from all sides. So, and I guess again that most of you would strongly agree with Peter Drucker when thinking about today's corporate environment. But what do you think when Peter Drucker actually made this statement? He made this statement in the year 1955. That's roughly 65 years ago. So what do I want to tell you with this? Well, simply that, let's face it, every generation of managers perceives its current business environment as especially challenging and dynamic. But that so far, also every generation of executives has found their own way to cope with whatever uncertainty and ambiguity they had to deal with. And there's no doubt that we will also be able to adapt in one way or the other to the currently high levels of uncertainty in the business context. However, whoever is doing this faster and better will certainly enjoy some advantages over their competitors. And now, as a source of inspiration to come up with your own approach to deal with today's levels of uncertainty and ambiguity, I would like to introduce you to the concept of decision intelligence. So, I personally started my work on what we today call decision intelligence in 2014, when most people, still focused on concepts like business intelligence, and artificial intelligence was actually still something, fancy and in the future. And well, my personal approach to decision intelligence was then very simple. Given that digitization is actually not really changing the real world, as compared to biotechnology or advanced materials engineering, more digitization at the end only makes sense if it provides more transparency, and if this transparency is turned into better decisions. And that's why I then actually started to put decisions into the center of my own research. And well, given that I actually never studied or taught at Harvard or Stanford, except for a few companies, it was actually pretty difficult and hard to convince, executives to embrace that kind of concept and thinking in its total. So, well, this situation has luckily changed since Google started to push the term decision intelligence mid-2018 within the global data, science community. And now more and more executives are actually starting to pay attention to this approach, realizing that they need to combine the possibilities of advanced data science with classic managerial, engineering, social, and natural sciences. And for Casey Kozyrkov, Google's head of decision intelligence, DI is even a new academic discipline concerned with all aspects of selecting between options. It brings together the best of applied data science, social science, and managerial science into a unified field that helps people to, use data to improve their lives, their businesses, and the world around them. So, and in other words, decision intelligence combines multiple disciplines to turn information, into better actions at any scale. Recently, also IBM, defined decision intelligence actually as AI applied to business, arguing that most tech companies are only starting to really understand what all the gadgets and unlimited possibilities of advanced analytics actually mean in order to create value, and that only, real value is created if these kind of data analytics turn transparency actually result in better decisions. So in the following, I will simply present you what we call the Decision Intelligence Navigator and its 4 key elements to combine mental models to better understand the world, mental models to avoid cognitive biases, as well as to make use of all sorts of old and new technologies to gather information and knowledge, what you need. So, okay. Now, first and foremost, let me be clear that Decision Intelligence Navigator is nothing revolutionary. It's actually not even a tool or a framework per se, but rather, as the name indicates, it's a guide, a navigator that helps you to make the use of different tools and concepts in a specific decision context to actually make better decisions. And what does this mean? So I hope now the slides follow faster. Yes. The first step of the Decision Intelligence Navigator is simply defining the decision context. This means asking the right questions to get answered before you actually make a decision. The second step involves the selection of then the most suitable analysis frameworks to actually answer the questions you identified in step one. That's a capability that we call framework proficiency. And the third step then is that you gather the necessary data, information, knowledge to fill in the selected analysis frameworks from step two. And that again, at the organizational as well at the personal level, requires different forms of intelligence access. And the result of this fit between the questions and the way you answer them, that's the result is then what we call insights, the decision relevant knowledge, the filtered knowledge that you really need, and not what's just in Wikipedia or the corporate knowledge database. So, and the result of that needs then to be turned actually into decisions. It's not enough just to know. The real challenge is then to take these insights and analyze them unbiased. And this kind of capability is what we call decision proficiency. Now, but let's have a look at the elements in more detail. And what do they mean for our daily work in the corporate world? So, as I said, the Decision Intelligence Navigator, the first element is defining the decision context, and it's all about asking the right questions. And in order to do that, you first need to clearly define actually which decision-making challenge are you really looking at. Then you try to really list all the questions you need to get answered to make that decision. And this might sound very simple and obvious, but ask yourself, how often do you really define in detail the specific decision-making challenges you face, and really all relevant questions that you still need to get answered? Or as Peter Drucker, said, the most common source of mistakes in management decisions is the emphasis on finding the right answer rather than the right questions. And I could give you now at least a dozen of different other quotes and show you multiple strategy process frameworks that all highlight the importance of defining, first, which questions you really need to get answered before you jump into the solution development. And by the way, you don't need to have sophisticated tools or platforms to define your decision context. A simple, most freely available, mind map solution does the job, mostly in 95% of the cases. So, but how does the asking the right question, thing really works? And well, among other aspects, I just want to be clear about one thing or address one aspect, and that's to get ready and understand the starting point. So what you see on this slide is actually our two by two matrices, that we have developed as alternatives to existing VUCA frameworks in order to support our clients in better understanding, where they start. On the left, the insight level, actually, this matrix helps executives to reflect in more detail about the level of uncertainty and ambiguity they face, and thus what kind of intelligence they actually need. On the right, the change level matrix helps executives to position the decision-making challenge in the larger context of their company, with respect to industry dynamics and industry convergence as substitutes for the classic volatility and complexity labels. So let's have a quick look at my projects with Daimler Trucks over the last couple of years and what this means. First, we had a Russian joint venture project, which was basically about whether to continue with the joint venture or set up a kind of greenfield project. actually quite a simple yes or no decision-making challenge with not too much uncertainty, about the facts, but a lot of challenges to actually correctly interpret the gathered intelligence. Putting the project into the interpretation box in the insight level matrix. And this helped the company to understand upfront and early that they need much more people with a lot of experience in Russia to get the picture right. At the same time, the Russian truck industry was not very dynamic and required, only minimal changes in the business model of Daimler, putting it in the change level matrix in the evolution box. Different than was a China business model design project, where we actually focused on really understanding how the future business model for Daimler trucks in China could look like. And you can imagine designing a new business model has a lot of different questions you need to get answered. And we were lucky, at least from the project perspective, that we had lots of China experts on board that then were able to actually interpret all the intelligence we gathered. But the key challenge was really to find, and overcome all the uncertainty, and address all the questions we had, putting, the China project into the knowledge box here, or the insight box, as you often label it. Similar in the situation then, however, on the change level thing, it was more or less close to Russia. Differently, the e-truck business model design that is still going on is obviously a situation where, well, neither Daimler has or had, the intelligence already required, nor do we at Daimler have already the necessary experience to interpret, to overcome the ambiguity, putting the project into a true, exploration situation, finding out what's really happening. And the same on the change level front, where we realized, well, with a lot of industry dynamics and a high level of industry convergence going on, we really need to at least be innovative, if not even think of it from a revolutionary perspective. So, and again, this is where you start, at least asking the right questions, trying to understand, where you are. And then obviously there are many more steps that, I unfortunately cannot address all of them in the next couple of minutes still. So, but let's switch then, therefore, to the second element of the Decision Intelligence Navigator and what we call framework proficiency. And in short, it actually simply requires you to make use of the most suitable, analysis frameworks to answer the questions you identified when defining the decision context. And again, this might sound easy and obvious, but in my experience, with dozens of companies and research among numerous MBA students, it shows me that there's hardly any reflection on the selection of the right analysis tools based on the specific insight level and the change level situation you're in. For example, if your company is facing a revenue growth challenge, how do you decide whether you actually tackle this problem through a design thinking approach or a blue ocean approach? Because both concepts, to put it simple, try to identify new ways of satisfying requirements of new or existing customers in a unique way. And so far, I actually have hardly met anybody who is or has been able to provide a sophisticated answer to this question. And therefore, according to my experience, most analysis tool framework choices are rather based on what's currently simply en vogue, or what people are already used to work with. Another example is how executives try to understand their industry environment. Again, most companies just go for Porter's five forces and PEST as the primary tool, but in today's world of converging industries and platform-based, businesses, you definitely need to consider a business ecosystem analysis approach, trying to understand, the power dynamics that come from a keystone player approach. So, and again, I'm aware that also the second step actually requires a lot of time, which we often don't have or don't get. But coming back to the title of our webinar, using a strategic mindset to make better decisions, well, you can neither outsource, the thinking to algorithms, not to consultants. Sorry, guys. So asking the right questions and making sure you focus on the really important aspects is what strategists and senior decision makers should really get, paid for. Now, and what does this mean, again, in practice? What I show you on this slide is really just some preliminary research results that I have done in the past when we asked executives and managers about how suitable they perceive different strategy tools when facing high levels of uncertainty, ambiguity, industry dynamics, and industry convergence. And in this combined insight change level matrix, what you see are just first indications that managers find some strategy tools, more or less useful depending on the availability of knowledge, the existence of ambiguity, as well as higher low levels of industry convergence and industry dynamics. The point I want to make here is not that I can already tell you exactly which tools are probably the best ones under which insight and change circumstances, because the results are based on relatively small, sample size. But I really want to motivate you to reflect more on your specific choice of strategy tools and frameworks the next time you actually make an important decision. Which actually, then brings me to the third element, or may I say challenge of the Decision Intelligence Navigator, and that's creating intelligence access. Well, when it comes to intelligence access, I would like to just address two of many possible topics in today's webinars. The first one is that, well, many strategic analyses are required because the future is unlikely to look like the past. And in such situations, the pattern recognition capabilities of big data analytics, is often very limited, if not dangerous, because the basic assumptions of such an approach is that big data from the past, even if it's just the recent past, is a proxy for how the future looks like still. However, not only COVID-19, but also much less dramatic developments have caused such impactful changes on how the rules of the game in an industry, are played, that making decisions based on patterns recognized in the past is probably very misleading. So such situations still rather require human capabilities to improve causation and especially to imagine, how the future might look like, and then draw conclusions for your own business model, design and necessary adaptations. And again, to give an example, in my work with Daimler Trucks on their China Business Model 2025 project, we actually identified only a handful of relevant questions that we were able to answer with big data analytics. And for almost, I would say 90% of the questions, we rather had to make use of what I call good old-fashioned expert panels, in the form of Delphi studies. And the only thing we did was we innovated on the technical side to get our own online and real-time Delphi solution so that we could offer participating experts what I call a real-time online opinion benchmarking opportunity, actually helping us to convince many Chinese managers of very conservative Chinese firms to actually share a lot of insights with us. And the second aspect that I would like to address when we talk about intelligence access is that we need to try to understand, and we need to really act upon the fact that it's not only about big data and advanced analytics, it's not only in even small data approaches, etc. It's at the end not mostly about technologies, in the classic sense, but it's a lot about new innovative ways on how we actually organize or reorganize our intelligence processing and decision-making structures within our organizations. And as Professor Martin Rees from the BCG Henderson Institute actually once wrote, to unlock, the full potential of advanced analytics technologies, leaders must really rethink how their companies operate. Traditional organizational hierarchies can only react slowly and have very limited decision-making bandwidth. So even if you knew the optimal product selection, marketing strategy, and pricing for every customer in every second, could your current organization actually decide and act on that information? Probably not. And that's where the concept of self-tuning comes in. Self-tuning is related to the concepts of agility, which means rapid adjustment, so to say, adaptation, learning through trial and error, and then ambidexterity, balancing, the exploration and exploitation of different markets. And actually, self-tuning therefore incorporates these elements, but it also includes this in a self-directed fashion. And achieving such a self-tuning organization as the Alibaba Group, for example, tries already to implement, requires really a different way of thinking about managing an enterprise. And it's exactly these sort of adaptations which will keep us as academics and us as practitioners, busy for at least the next decade. Because making better decisions is not only about mastering mental models or investing into advanced analytic solutions, but it will be in the near future, also thanks to COVID and new forms of work from home, concepts, a matter of innovative ways of restructuring, how companies gather and process intelligence and actually organize their decision making. So now, what does this mean once we have collected the necessary intelligence, for the frameworks we identified as useful to answer the questions that we need to, to make the final decision? Well, what we have is insights, but we still need to turn these insights into decisions. And as I said at the very beginning, a strategic mindset consists of two major forms of mental models. Mental models that help us to analyze and understand a specific situation, and that's what we normally address to with the framework proficiency, and mental models that actually support you in avoiding any cognitive bias while you turn the insights you actually created into an actual decision. And that's the capability we label as decision proficiency. So, and in order to give you all a number of the cognitive biases that you, theoretically, need to consider doing a decision-making process, let me ask you, in how many ways can your mental processes lead you astray? So, well, according to different, scholars, there exist at least 187 cognitive biases. And how many of these 187 actually are you aware of? Less than 10? Don't worry. You're not alone. And I'm not saying that you need to know all the 187, but it might help really to be aware of the most relevant ones in your most frequent decision contexts, so to say. And you might even think of future human-driven analysis and decision-making systems that automatically check, for example, for cognitive biases along the decision-making process. That's something that we currently work on under the label decision avatars. So, but now let me actually show you what this means with a simple example. And you might be aware of survivorship bias, you might not. Let me quickly explain how this is important also for our corporate, context. Well, survivorship bias already played an important role during World War II, when actually Abraham Wald from Columbia University made use of the survivorship bias concept when supporting the US military, who tried to analyze how to minimize, bomber losses due to enemy fire. So, and when looking at the bombers that had returned, like the one, you see in the picture, the US military, wanted to add additional armor actually to the most hit areas indicated by the red dots. However, Walt argued that the US military had only looked at those aircrafts that had actually returned home and had survived, actually meaning that the bombers could actually take a lot of damage in the red dotted areas, but most likely not in the remaining white ones. So finally, the US military got convinced by Walt and reinforced those areas of the bombers which were still white, based on the later confirmed assumption that bombers which got hit in those white areas are actually very quickly to crash. So, and the essence of this short survivorship bias story is that we often don't see the failure cases in business, in life, and here in war. And more than just sometimes, it's the failures, that have the most important lessons to teach. This is also why I'm very skeptical often when we only look at the success cases in business, such as Apple, Amazon, Facebook, because we then mostly look only at the red dots, and not at the white space in between. And that's where also in business, often the real value comes from. So let me put those 4 elements again together in a summary. So from a decision context perspective, in today's world of extreme uncertainty and ambiguity, having a strategic mindset is not about dealing with today's news and information, but actually focusing on the right questions ahead of you, and define the necessary decision context. When most management frameworks as of today, are almost freely available, your value as an executive doesn't really come from knowing them, but from selecting the right ones for each question you need to get answered. And mastering this kind of mental models, this combination and trying to be able to filter is what we call framework proficiency. And when the future is unlikely to look like the past, the pattern recognition advantages of machine learning and AI application, diminish rapidly. For any future-oriented strategic work, you better ensure to have intelligence access, through big and small data. And this requires, again, new forms of activating your employees and their social capital. And finally, to turn data into action, it's not enough to improve your insights, your decision relevant knowledge, but actually to increase your and your team's cognitive diversity. So, and this avoidance of any unwanted cognitive bias is what we call, decision proficiency. And with this, I'm actually handing over to Suzanne, who is handling then the Q&A session. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Roger. So I understand that the decision context and framework proficiency require a lot of time, and that's time many of us don't have. When you talked about intelligence access via online expert panels at Daimler in China, it seems to be a great source of efficiency compared to other approaches. So could you provide a little bit more detail about that?
Yeah, I mean, again, neither the approach nor the technology is actually really new, but we have seen that in today's world of instant gratification, even managers, they're not interested to fill in, long questionnaires, or it's often very difficult for them to commit time for interviews. But what they actually can do is, and what they're motivated to, is benchmarking their own opinions, especially about future developments. And these online expert panels, if they are well developed, well prepared by the strategy team, for example, is a very convenient, very efficient way to actually gather viewpoints, opinions outside of your own company, to, let's say, increase the horizon, make sure you don't have blind spots on specific developments. You don't miss out on important trends that are actually affecting probably, the way you still earn money tomorrow.
Thank you. You mentioned the Decision Intelligence Navigator is not a tool itself, and it's more of a basic guide. How can I make use of it today to improve my own decision making?
Well, first of all, we have put together a list of, let's say, useful websites that can help you to really think more about framework proficiency, how you can do that. There is a great overview on all those cognitive biases, again, done by a colleague of mine from the University of St. Gallen in Switzerland. There are plenty of resources that we provide. We also provide you with, I think it's almost 50 pages of a manual on how to actually today develop and analyze scenarios. So looking into the future, asking the right questions, which trends, which developments really matter today, which ones will affect the way my business model works, how I will make money, and how you actually then draw conclusions from those scenarios into your functional strategies to actually get ready in one way or the other.
Great. So we've got a great question here from Mark, and he's asking, do you see a risk as we build machine learning and AI that we will increase bias for decision intelligence, which will then be used widely?
Thanks, Mark. Yes. Again, there's always a risk in new things, and the just relying on algorithms, on AI in a black box is certainly, something that we will have to do very carefully. I think it always depends on the actual application case. What I am working on, for example, is much more on the interaction between human intelligence and actually artificial intelligence. Or again, we call this a decision avatar, where I still rely on the human intelligence of experts, especially in situations where the past is not like the future, or the other way around, so to say. And there you can make use of AI to capture my personal decision making into an algorithm. And you can do the same with actually many other experts. And then you can also combine those different individual algorithms into a combined one. That's a kind of artificial, combined wisdom approach. And you can then compare these kind of approaches sometimes with pure, big data analytics, driven AI solutions to balance things out. I can't give you, an appropriate answer per se in detail, but I'm aware, we all have to be aware. And as long as we still, let's say, don't forget to think on our own, I think we have it under control.
Thank you. We've got a great question here from Helen in regard to, do you find that leaders are more or less tolerant than they used to be to spend the time to define the context up front?
Thanks, Helen. I'm not sure, to be honest. But I have been, well, especially now when we relate to COVID-19 and the recent pressure, I think sometimes it's, as a leader, you just need to say, look, this is the direction we go. And I don't want to discuss every detail because I decided that's the way to go. The problem, I think, came up earlier when the leader did not develop the necessary trust, from the employees to actually get or earn this trust to then say, look, we are in a situation where we don't have time. We cannot discuss everything. Now we just do as I say. So I think probably what we all need to be aware of, and that's what I try to also do when I work with executives and board members, is make sure you have enough time. Make sure you, as the CEO, as the chairman of the board, your responsibility today is ask the right questions, prepare the company for what's coming. And if you have a lot of daily operations, you might rather reorganize the way, your board works, or the middle management that you have. You might need to have additional capacity, but at the top, your first and foremost responsibility is to think more, and make sure that you ask the right questions rather than just pretend to already have the answers.
Thanks very much, Roger. Do you have a demarcation between data science and decision intelligence?
Well, see, data science, again, is a very broad field, from statistics to analytics and so on. And Casey Kacirkov has written a whole bunch of articles about what is what. At the end, again, data science alone without the input from social, managerial, natural sciences, doesn't work. The same as natural sciences, managerial science doesn't work with statistics, so to say. And what we might label today as data science, as advanced data science, is just more powerful guns, tools, but without the frameworks from social science, data science is relatively useless because we don't know what we do it for. And most of social, managerial, natural sciences do not work without actually creating some transparency finally through mathematical models. And decision intelligence, as I said, it's nothing revolutionary. It's nothing that hasn't existed yet. It's more of a creating more awareness that the two fields really need to talk to each other, need to better understand the pros and cons, the things that both sides can bring to the table to actually finally, and that's the point, solve problems in the real world, be it, regarding healthcare with COVID-19, be it in the corporate world or just in your private life.
Great. So we've just got a couple more questions that we've got some time for. I know we're going over, but we've got lots of great questions coming through here. So trying to respond to everybody. Thank you. Got a couple of questions about behavioural biases in regard to AI. So how would you use AI to address behavioural biases? And there's another question here. How would you use big data to address behaviour biases?
Again, I'm first and foremost, I'm not an expert, in that specific area. My job has always been, connect the dots and make sure that at the end, the result is what it should be. When we talk about using, big data or advanced technologies to fight cognitive biases, again, I can give you an example where we are currently working on a solution. When you look at human resources managers, and you monitor actually their selection of profiles, they look at, who they invite for interviews and who they actually, hire as human beings. And if you monitor that and you compare the decision-making, algorithm, so to say, of each HR manager, of each recruiting specialist, you can, for example, compare those algorithms and see whether somebody has a bias towards, certain groups of people, certain ages of people, etc., and make them aware and that they seem to have a tendency, and talk to them, and see why they are doing this. Often it might be just that they had a certain number of cases, or they were looking for specific jobs where they had just a limited case of applications. So that's one way of doing it. Another one is we are currently working on a project that we call Contextual Intelligence Platform, where we try to, let's say, put most of the management frameworks that onto the platform, so that you can go with a click of the button, with the click on a button, and say, look, I want to do a pestle, analysis for the machine equipment manufacturing sector in India. And then you already get all the relevant questions that you need to address. And then that's the framework proficiency, that's the stability. And then you get the opportunity to do your own expert panel, look for the experts, get your inputs, and then as you go through each step, we are building also checklists for the use and the definition of Delphi studies of which cognitive biases are you actually, mostly prone to, and have you taken the following countermeasures to actually avoid those biases. And in the long run, you might even then can look at, from the texts that you got from the comments, on how you could probably leverage big data for, a kind of individual second interpretation of the results as compared to what the managers do. But as I said, we don't have the silver bullet approach. We are also working and struggling with still, those challenges. And I think at the end, just discussing with each other looking at different perspectives, learning from each other will be, what we need to do for the next couple of years still.
A great response, Roger. Our last question for today is from Christian, and it's, what are your suggestions for a company to begin their journey into decision intelligence or create a decision intelligence function within an organization?
As I used to say when I teach also strategic management, I'm not here to teach you tools. I'm here to change your mindset. No? And the same goes when you work, or when we work with companies and trying to bring them closer to what we define as decision intelligence is, we need to convince, the top executives, because if they don't live it, if they don't foster it, well, as everybody, especially now, you just follow the rules, you make sure you fulfill your KPIs, whether this then makes sense from your own perspective or not, you don't care. No? And this is why if the senior guys don't buy into it, the rest is mostly a waste of time and resources.
Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better. Very informative session today. Thank you so much for all of your questions that you've sent through to us. I'm sorry if we didn't get time to answer them, but we did our best. Thank you very much, Roger. I'd like to hand back to Tony Carlton to close our session for today. Tony.
Thanks, Suzanne, and thanks, Roger, for a very interesting presentation. Our follow-up email will include a link to a recording of today's webinar and also some additional resources that will help you further explore this topic, including all of those that Roger listed in his webinar presentation. Macquarie Business School offers a range of short courses, both virtual and face-to-face, and our contact details are showing on the screen now for you to follow up if you wish. As this is likely our last webinar for the year, I'd like to thank the corporate and professional education team at Macquarie Business School, particularly Suzanne Holmes, for all of the hard work they've done in pulling together a very successful series of 15 webinars. It's been a great exercise. So thank you, team, and thank you particularly, Suzanne. With that, I'd like to thank everyone for your participation in today's webinar. The chat and Q&A has been really active, so that's great. Thank you again to Roger. And we encourage you to keep your eye out for future webinars and short courses offered by Macquarie Business School. Thank you.